Welcome once again to the revision class for the upcoming UGC NET exam English. And this class is provided by Professor Academy, Chennai. In today's class, we are going to look at literary criticism, key texts and terms. In other words, we are going to look at prose. And when we say prose, we can start with Philip Sidney and his work, An Apology for Poetry. When we say the word apology, apology here means defense, a defense of poetry. And this work was a response to Stephen Gossen's A School of Abuse. Stephen Gossen said poets abused the wits of common people. And there was also a charge against poets by Plato. Plato denied entry to his ideal city for poets. Poets should not enter his utopia. And now Philip Sidney was tasked with defending or safeguarding poets and their principles. And he starts his essay with the words itself, the words for poets. The Romans used the word vates, V-A-T-E-S, for poets. Vates means diviner or foreseer or prophet. A diviner, think of a water diviner, someone who has the ability to sense the presence of water underground. That person can see which cannot be seen by everybody. Similar way, a poet has the ability to read things which others can't see in the real world. And the Greeks use the word poiein, P-O-I-E-I-N, which means to make. And from that, the English creates the word poet. A poet means a maker, someone who creates a new world. And that world is a guide to the real world. So that's Sidney's defense. And Sidney says poets are not liars because they do not claim truth. Something is a lie, and if it goes against truth. Since poets do not claim truth, they are not liars. And Sidney also discusses three general kinds of poetry. Number one, spiritual. Spiritual of God. Next, philosophical, of thought. Imaginative, of invention. So these are the three general kinds of poetry. Next, he talks about two principal challenges to poets. They are philosophers and historians. The problem with philosophers, they come up with percepts, general principles about life. About historians, they come up with solid examples from history. But the general principles are too vague for the common people to understand. And the particular examples are so raw, are too raw for the common people. And here comes the poet who combines both the percepts by philosophers and raw examples by historians. And the poet gives these in such a way that they are easily consumed by common readers. So this is how a poet stands superior to both philosophers and historians. Now let's look at Francis Bacon and his work Novum Organum, which means new tool. So when we say new tool, there must be something called old tool. So Francis Bacon's title refers to Aristotle's book Organum, O-R-G-A-N-O-N, which means tool, a tool of inquiry. So Aristotle used a method called deductive method. That method refers to how you use a general principle to analyze particular problems, particular instances. But Francis Bacon comes up with an exactly opposite concept called inductive method, which is also called Baconian method. Here, first we analyze particular situations, particular instances, and with that we create a general principle. And this is how a science should be, a scientific method should be. So this is Francis Bacon's argument. And in this work, Novum Organum, he talks about 4 idols of the mind, the idols which deceive a human mind. So we should be aware of these 4 idols. Number 1, idols of the tribe. So tribe refers to something that is natural to humans. So it is there in the human nature itself. So that is the tribe. And in the sense, human follies, general human follies which deceive human beings. Number 2, idols of the cave. Cave here refers to each person's individual spirit. In the sense, each individual has a cave of his or her own. They have their own prejudices. And these prejudices prevents him or her from looking at the truth. And the third, idols of the market. Think of a market where we talk with other people for trade, where if you go wrong, or if you wrongly use a word, then that creates a problem. So here, Francis Bacon talks about our ill choice of words. So we have to be beware of our choice of words, or that will land us in trouble. Fourth, idols of the theater. When we say theater, theater here refers to an imaginary world, an illusion. So which talks about dogmas of philosophies. So each individual subscribes himself or herself to certain philosophies, perhaps to a political organization or some other institution, social institution. They stick themselves to such philosophies provided by certain social institutions like politics or political parties. And because of their affiliation, they can't see the other side of the truth. So these are the things one should be aware of. The idols of the tribe, the idols of the cave, the idols of the market, the idols of the theater. Next, John Dryden, an essay of dramatic poesy, 1668, in which we have 4 people discussing theater in general, and each one talking about, or each one representing a particular theater. Now they are on the Thames River on a boat, and they are discussing these things. Possible questions. Number 1, they will ask you, the question setters will ask you, who stands for whom or what? So this is the slide you should pay attention to. So there are 4 people. Number 1, Crites, C-R-I-T-E-S. Crites represents Sir Robert Howard. And he talks about, or he talks on behalf of ancient writers. So you have to remember this equation. Number 2, Eugenius, E-U-G-E-N-I-U-S, Eugenius. Eugenius represents Charles Sackville. Charles Sackville spoke on behalf of modern writers. Then we have Lycidius, Sir Charles Sedley, on behalf of French drama. Then finally we have Neander. Neander means new man, which automatically refers to John Dryden. And John Dryden spoke for English drama. Questions will be very direct. They will simply ask, okay, Neander represents whom? John Dryden, or Neander spoke on behalf of English drama. So you have to remember the 4 people, the characters, and for whom they stand for and for what they spoke of. Next one, we have Alexander Pope, an essay on criticism. An essay on criticism was written in heroic couplet, of course, which was used by Dryden. Pope perfected that couplet. So when we say heroic couplet, it's made of 2 lines. The thought doesn't run on to the next line. It is there in a self-contained within these 2 lines. And they are written in iambic pentameter, and they have rhyming ending. Let's see. In poets, as true genius is but rare, true taste as seldom is a critic's share. So this is these lines are an example of iambic heroic couplet, and they are written in iambic pentameter. And the words in words ending, I mean the words that end the lines, rare and share, they rhyme. Okay, so it is very tough writing an essay in the form of verse, and that too in heroic couplet. So in the first two lines, he says, in poets as a true genius is but rare. So what makes poets true genius? They should stand out from the rest of the crowd, but which is rare. Hardly poets possess this rare quality, true genius. Next, what is the quality? What is the quality that a critic should have? A critic should have true taste, not prejudices. He or she should not be prejudiced by anything. Critic should have true taste, but which is also rare. Next, these are some of the very famous lines that come in Pope's work. A little learning is a dangerous thing. Drink deep or taste not the poiein spring. So poiein spring here refers to Hippocrene, a fountain in the mountain Olympus, where we have gods who drink from that, and that spring is known for inspiring others. Okay, and a little learning is a dangerous thing because that might land you in trouble anytime. So drink deep. Then these next two lines are almost become proverbs in English. To err is human, to forgive divine. Next, for fools rush in where angels fear to tread. So these are some of the famous lines that come in Pope's work. Next, Samuel Johnson. When we say Samuel Johnson, we think of his dictionary published in 1755. And in 1765, he came up with a collection. I mean, he edited Shakespeare's works. His edition of Shakespeare's works came out, and for which he wrote a preface. And that is Preface to Shakespeare. And in his preface, he talks about both the faults and merits of Shakespeare. And this is his criticism. He says, Shakespeare's tragedy seems to be skill. I mean, Shakespeare is very good at comedy. Comedy comes to him naturally. His comedy to be instinct. On the other hand, when he writes tragedies, he labors a lot. It is laborious. He needs skill for that, which is not natural. Then these are some of his accusations against Shakespeare. He sacrifices virtue to convenience. So as a playwright, he is not bothered about conveying virtues to his audience. He manipulates virtues according to the situation, according to the play. Okay, his main concern is more entertainment than conveying virtue. Next, a quibble was to him the fatal Cleopatra. A quibble here refers to pun, wordplay. Shakespeare is known for wordplays. All right. So he says Shakespeare will sacrifice even a particular perfect situation in a play just to make puns. So it's like the fatal Cleopatra for Shakespeare, because Cleopatra died by just embracing an asp, a snake, and the snake bit her and she died. Similar way, pun is like to Shakespeare. Shakespeare is ready to make this snake kill him, and he's happy to do that. And towards the end of the essay, Johnson says, Shakespeare looked inwards and found her there. Her here refers to nature. Other writers looked outward to find nature. They search for her often. Sometimes some do not find nature in their work. Whereas Shakespeare just looked within himself and found nature in her, in him itself. Next, the notes borrowed or written. And for his edition of Shakespeare's work, he borrowed notes from various authors, and he also came up with his own notes. So Johnson says, these are the methods I followed. Number one, the notes borrowed or written are first illustrative. In the sense, illustration. If there is a difficulty, I explained it in simple words. So that's number one. The purpose is to illustrate, to give explanation for difficult things. Number two, judicial. If there are mistakes and if there are beauties, like a judge, I commented on both. I was impartial, so that is judicial. Then emendatory, E-M-E-N-D-A-T-O-R-Y. So if there are, there are faults, there are deprivations, if there are mistakes, I corrected them. So these are the functions, or this is how he worked with his notes. Next, William Wordsworth. When we say William Wordsworth, we think of his collaboration with Coleridge, Lyrical Ballads, published in 1798. And 2 years later, 1800, he came up with a preface to defend himself and Coleridge's poetic principles. They said poetry can be written, or poems can be written in common man's language, and the theme of poems can be about common subjects, everyday happenings, something that happens every day. And for this, they were criticized. And this preface is primarily to defend their poetic principles, especially Wordsworth. And one of his famous words, spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings recollected in tranquility. We know that. And in the beginning itself, he talks about the principal object of this poetry collection, Lyrical Ballads, to choose incidents and situations from common life, and that should be represented in a language really used by common people. So this is the principal object of Lyrical Ballads. And in the preface, Wordsworth talks about some of the principles he followed for his own poems. So he says, for his poem, The Idiot Boy and Mad Mother, he used this principle. He wants to convey the maternal passion, so which is a common subject. A mother's concern about his child, about her child, about her children. So best example, The Idiot Boy, where a boy who is mentally challenged, who has some problem with his mental health, he is asked by his mother to go to a doctor or to fetch a doctor for the neighbor who is sick. But the boy goes on a horse, but he is distracted, and the horse takes him to a lake, and they're just there. They are just there, and they are not returning. And the mother is concerned about the boy, and she goes after him, and she's relieved when she finds him there. And both are returning, and the neighbor also comes. She's also concerned about the boy and the mother, and she also goes there, and all the three return home safely. Okay, so it's all about maternal passion. And the second one, The Forsaken Indian, based on, the aim is to convey the lost struggles of a human being before death. And this is based on the American Indians, Native Indians, and they have a tradition. If someone is sick in the group, when someone is about to die, and they know this person might stop the progress of the group. The group has to go on and on. They are nomads. They have to travel. But this sick person might stop that. So what they do, they forsake that particular person, sick person, but not just forsaking. They give everything to that person, food and clothes and other things. As long as that person is alive, or as long as that food loss, that person can survive, and then that person has to take care of himself or herself. Here in that poem, The Forsaken Indian, it's about a woman who is forsaken by the group, and even in that situation, she is more bothered about her child, but the child will be taken care of by the group. Then we have a very beautiful poem, VR7, which talks about the child's notion of death. So here is a speaker who speaks to a child in a churchyard. The child says, I have we are seven siblings, but 2 are with God, or 2 are in the churchyard, 2 are in the sea, 2 are somewhere else. She talks about that. Then the person says, the speaker says, okay, so you are actually 5, 2 are dead. And the child says, no, we are 7. For that child, the 2 are not dead, as if they are somewhere else. That's all. So that is that child's understanding of death. For her, the 2 siblings are not dead. They are still alive, but somewhere else. So that's her notion, or the child's notion of death. And that is captured in this poem, VR7. And there is another definition given by Wordsworth to poetry. Poetry is the breadth and finer spirit of all knowledge. Of all knowledge, poetry is pure, which is finer than any other knowledge. Next one, of course, we have to look at Samuel Taylor Coleridge and his Biographia Literaria, 1817, in which he talks about his poetic principles. Chapter 13 and chapter 14 are the important chapters. In chapter 13, he talks about fancy, primary imagination, and secondary imagination. He says, when we create, there are 3 stages. Number 1, poets or anyone who is a creator, the first thing is fancy, which is fixities and definities, or it's just a mode of memory. Just think, you go for a walk. What do? You rely on your senses, eyes, ears, touch. So first thing, we just look around us. We listen to the things around us. We collect things, unconsciously, with involuntarily. Just we take things in, which is just there. It's kind of a mode of memory. The things around us get registered in our mind, but without any effort. So that is the first stage, fancy, right? Second one, it's like a fancy is more like data collection, right? Data collection, but without effort. It just things just get stored in our mind. So that's why that is a mode of memory, first stage. Second one, whatever we have collected in our mind, we try to look at them with a perspective. So that is primary imagination. So primary imagination is called the prime agent of all human perception. So after collecting data, what we do, we look at them with a perspective. We have a perspective of our own, and with that perspective, we analyze that data, right? Or analyze whatever we have experienced in our life. So that is primary imagination, and which is also common to everybody. And the third one is important, which is secondary imagination. This is where poets come in. This is where creation comes in. So in order to create, we have to go to the next level, not just a mode of memory, or the prime agent. Whatever is there in our mind, it has to dissolve, diffuse, and dissipate so that it will come up with a new shape in the form of poetry or in any form of art. So this is secondary imagination, where everything, our idea of things, gets shattered and they come in a different shape and form an art. So that is secondary imagination. And chapter 14 is also important, where he talks about his poetic principle. He says, Coleridge says, willing suspension of disbelief. This is what makes poetic faith. What is poetic faith? So whenever readers read, they know that whatever is represented in a work of art is not just truth. It is created by a person, right? And in order to enjoy that, in order to enjoy the world created, the poetic world created by the artist, the reader has to willingly suspend his or her disbelief. See, if disbelief in the sense of doubt. If you doubt too much, you can't enjoy art. So while watching a movie, what we do, we suspend our disbelief. We just relax and enjoy whatever it is shown. For instance, Avatar. When we watch that movie, we know that's not true. Yet we enjoy because for that moment, they suspend things, doubtful things. We just keep things aside and enjoy, which is what makes poetic faith. And this is a famous principle by Coleridge. And towards the end of the essay, he says, good sense is the body of poetic genius. What is good sense? If you create something, it should make sense. If it is nonsense, then that's not poetic genius. So good sense is the body of poetic genius. If you want to create something, first that art should make sense. Next, fancy, kind of an data or what you represent, or a kind of figures of speeches. That is more like drapery, embellishment, decoration. Then motion, its life. When something is given to a reader, when the reader reads it, the reader should be carried forward. If the reader is not carried forward, then there is no life in poetry. So motion refers to how the reader is pushed forward to read on and on. And that is called life. Then imagination. So a piece of poetry should have imagination. If it is very dull, and no one is going to read that. So imagination is the soul that is everywhere and in each, and forms all into one graceful and intelligent whole. And ultimately, all these things combine to form a whole. Okay, it should not be parts here and there, it should come as a whole. So these are the things related to Coleridge's poetic principle. And he also used this word called essemblastic, ESEMPLASTIC, essemblastic power. This is the word he used for imagination. Essemblastic power, in the sense, the poet's imaginative power to create things that is not there, or his or her ability to combine various things in poetry. So that is essemblastic power. So power to bring different things which are not related to each other, but this power makes them makes these things connected and presented to others. Next, John Keats. So John Keats, primarily a poet, but in his letters to his brothers and friends, he talked about his poetic principles. So for instance, in his letter to his brothers, George and Thomas Keats, he talks about negative capability. So negative capability, by which he means a poet's ability to negate himself or herself from his or her work. So when you write something, and the work should not reflect your personality. So you should negate your personality from what you create. That is negative capability. So this is the definition he gave. When man is capable of being in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without any irritable reaching after fact and reason. So you create something, your presence should not be felt in that work. You should stand, or your personality should not be there in what you create. And Keats said, this is what Shakespeare had. Shakespeare had negative capability, because in Shakespeare's work, we can't find Shakespeare. His personality is not there in what he has created. On the other hand, Keats, in his letter to Richard Woodhouse, used the term egotistical sublime, which is the opposite of negative capability. Of course, that is one ability, but there is also another ability where you shed your ego. You talk about yourself, yet which is enjoyable. Yet how you present your personality to readers, it's up to you. You can make it sublime. You can't look like personal grumblings, but you make it a part of human nature. I, when you say I, the I also represents the universal. So you make it in such a way people can enjoy reading about yourself. Egotistical sublime, which is a thing per se and stands alone. Example, when Keats talks about egotistical sublime, he talks about Wordsworth. Till now, we know that the personal feelings of Wordsworth are registered in his works, yet we enjoy reading them. Because it's not just about Wordsworth's feelings, but it's also about people's feeling in general. That's why we enjoy Wordsworth's works. So remember these two terms, negative capability and egotistical sublime. And to Shelley, Keats wrote, my imagination is a monastery and I am its monk. So he stayed there and he wrote beautiful poems. Next, Shelley, a defense of poetry, which is based on Sidney's Defense. It was written in 1821 and published in 1840. And here he talks about poets or poetry in general. When we read this work, we have to pay attention to the comparisons he makes. Shelley is known for famous metaphors and similes. So we have to pay attention. Questions from this work comes like that. Okay, first thing first, this is one of his famous statements. Poetry or literature makes familiar objects not familiar. In the sense, what is at the base of literature? What is the function of literature? The function of literature is to make familiar objects around us unfamiliar. So when we read literature, we know the ordinary things are represented there. The things around us are represented there. Yet they seem different. They seem different in the sense they are represented differently by the creator. So that is the purpose of literature, to show familiar things in an unfamiliar way. Okay. So there is a concept called defamiliarization, discussed by Russian formalists. There is a school of criticism called Russian formalism. So if you want to more about defamiliarization, there is a separate video on defamiliarization published in Professor Academy's new channel, Professor Academy English. In that channel, there is a video on defamiliarization. You can listen to that. Okay, here, coming back to this work, Shelley. So in Shelley's defense, Shelley says, a poet is a nightingale who sits in darkness and sings to cheer its own solitude with sweet sounds. A poet doesn't bother about, the personal failings or personal problems. He is there to entertain others, like a nightingale, without revealing his presence. A poet is a nightingale who sits in darkness. So a poet need not show himself or herself to the world, and yet thrills the readers, sings to cheer its own solitude with sweet sound. Yes, they talk about sometimes about their personal problems, but their sweet sounds um, make people happy. Okay, and this is a metaphor. So you can get questions like, a poet is a nightingale. Who said a poet is a nightingale? You can get questions like that. Or you can get questions like, a great poem is a fountain, forever overflowing with the waters of wisdom and delight. Who said that? So again, this is a metaphor. A poem is compared to a fountain, which keeps producing, water of wisdom and delight, like to teach and delight. And the last statement is one of the often quoted lines from this book. Poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. They create new laws for the world to run smoothly, but they are not acknowledged. Poets are not acknowledged for their contribution to the welfare of the society. And in between, Shelley also talks about epic poets, Homer, Dante, and Milton. He calls Homer the first epic poet, Dante the second epic poet, and Milton the third epic poet. Remember, who comes first, who comes second, and third. So Homer, known for his Eliot and Odyssey. Then comes Dante, Divine Comedy. Then Milton, Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained. Okay, let's go to Matthew Arnold, Victorian age. When we say Matthew Arnold, known for The Function of Criticism and the Present Time, 1865. Arnold says, as a critic, you should be known for disinterestedness. What do you mean by disinterestedness? Critics should be disinterested in the sense, critics should be impartial, like a judge. They should not bring their prejudice to criticism. They should stand like a judge. They should comment on both faults and merits of a particular work. They should not be biased. Criticism should not be biased. So you should be neutral. So that is the purpose of, that's how a critic should be, or criticism should be. And in this work, Function of Criticism, he talks about two things: critical power and creative power. What is the function of the critical power or function of criticism? So that's the title of the essay. The business of criticism or the business of the critical power is to see the object as in itself it really is. In the sense, without any prejudice, we should comment on what we see. We should not bring our personal prejudices to criticism. Just say what a thing is in itself is. That's all. And number two, this is the function of criticism. The function of criticism is to create a current of true and fresh ideas. Why this is important? Because this is the business of critical power. And when you create a current of true and fresh ideas, and these ideas inspire poets, and they come up with their creative power. So in a way, the critical power is not useless. The critical power contributes to the creative power by creating a current of true and fresh ideas. These ideas inspire poets to create fresh works. Okay. Then, but what is the opposite? The bane of criticism. So if that is the boon, gift, and this is the bane, practical considerations cling to it and stifle it. Critics should not think that they are going to change the world. So they are going to be practical. They are going to give some practical solutions to everyday problems. If they think like that, then their criticism, if their criticism cling to that notion, then they are a failure, because that's not always possible. So that is the bane of criticism. Let's go to T.S. Eliot. When we say T.S. Eliot, this work comes to our mind often. The Metaphysical Poets, published in 1921. in which he talks about the uniqueness of metaphysical poets like Donne or Andrew Marvell. They are known for, metaphysical poets are known for telescoping of images. They bring a lot of images which are not connected at all, yet they bring and fuse them together in their works. Telescoping of images. So that's why T.S. Eliot says, a thought to Donne was an experience. It modified his sensibility. In the sense, Donne and metaphysical poets, they have a mechanism of sensibility. So the poets of the 17th century refers to metaphysical poets or metaphysical school of poetry. These poets, they have a mechanism of sensibility, a sensibility to combine thought and feeling. They do not differentiate thought and feeling. Both are same. They have the ability to bring them together. You can't separate thought and feeling. So whenever they come up with a metaphysical conceit, comparison, a metaphysical comparison like, John Donne comparing a pair of flowers with a pair of the legs of a compass. One is science, one is feeling. Yet both are fused in such a way that we do not see this is thought and this is feeling. Both go together, gel together. So that is the mechanism they had. But the poets of the modern age, they destroyed this sensibility. They lost this sensibility. They have something called a disassociation or dissociation of sensibility. What do you mean by dissociation of sensibility? They lost the sensibility to combine thought and feeling. They separated thought and feeling. They focused more on feelings in poetry. They said, okay, thought is for science and feelings is for poetry. So they came up with this division, the poets of the modern age, especially Dryden and Milton. So this is the accusation against Milton and Dryden by T.S. Eliot. Then Virginia Woolf, modern fiction. First, she gave it as a speech in 1919. Then there are a lot of publication. I mean, it published revised editions. Then 1925, the last one. Modern fiction, in which she talks about the earlier novelist and the modern novelist. The earlier novelist, like Edwardians, we have the materialists. She calls Virginia Woolf calls H.G. Wells, Arnold Bennett, and John Galsworthy materialists. Why? These writers focus on material reality, exterior reality. They talk about what people eat, what people wear, or how they act, physical actions, what we see on the outside. They do not talk about the inner reality of characters. The inner reality of characters is captured by the modern novelists like James Joyce, like D.H. Lawrence, or Dorothy Richardson, Virginia Woolf herself. So Virginia Woolf calls James Joyce the spiritualist, one who has the ability to see into the inner reality of people, an inner reality of characters. How an individual perceives the world is more important than the world itself. So that is how the spiritualist looks at the world or people. On the other hand, materials like H.G. Wells, Bennett, and Galsworthy just talk about exterior reality. So simply put, if you want to represent reality in the modern age, what you have to do, you have to examine for a moment an ordinary mind on an ordinary day. Simply put, stream of consciousness, a stream of ideas that goes in your mind. Can a novelist, especially a modern novelist, capture that stream of consciousness? So whatever that goes in your mind, like a stream of thoughts, or a train of thoughts in your mind in an ordinary day, on an ordinary day. If you are able to capture that inner reality, then you're succeeding as a modern novelist. So life is not a series of gig lamps symmetrically arranged. Life is a luminous halo. Very famous statement by Virginia Woolf in this book. So life is not a series of gig lamps. So you think of a chariot, a cart by driven by or pulled by a horse, just on the top of which we have gig lamps on both sides, neatly arranged. Life is not like that, right? Life is not like something that is arranged neatly. Life is a luminous halo. Just to think of a street light, and if it's raining, you see the drizzle in a selected place, like the halo formed by the light. And there are raindrops on the outside that halo, but there are raindrops which we are able to see in the halo. Can you capture that? Which is tough, right? A semi-transparent envelope surrounding us from the beginning of consciousness to the end. So if a writer can do that, and that is the birth of modernism. And she says that's like an incessant shower of innumerable atoms. It's like our ideas rain, but they don't rain in an arranged way. So just rain. All the thoughts coming in, past, present, future, everything coming in like an incessant shower, a rain of innumerable atoms, countless stream of thoughts. But we can't capture everything, but we should attempt to capture some part of it. So that should be the aim of modern novelists. So with this, let's end today's class. I hope we have touched upon prose across ages in English literature. So tomorrow we'll go for poetry. Thank you so much. Please subscribe to Professor Academy's new channel, Professor Academy English, exclusively for students of English literature. And we offer courses for UGC NET set. In Tamil Nadu, we offer courses for UGTRB, PGTRB, Polytechnic TRB, and TET. Thank you.